This is the exam review for Soc 101 for Fullerton College, exam 2. Okay, so from chapter 6, the first thing I'm going to ask you is about deviance. So for that, I'm looking for the definition, meaning deviance is a behavior, trait, or belief or other characteristic that violates a norm and causes a negative reaction. And I'm also looking for the fact that it's socially constructed. And of course, deviance is also different across cultures, something we talked about in class. For Merton's strain theory, I want you to understand that an innovator is someone who accepts society's goals, but does not use society's approved means to achieve their goals. For rebels, I want you to know that this is a person who creates their own goals using their own means. For stigma, I just want the definition. It's a term for any physical or social attribute that devalues a person or group identity and excludes those not valued from social interactions. For passing, that again, the definition from your book, it shows presenting yourself as a member of a different group than the stigmatized group you are a part of. A deviance avowal is the idea of initiating your own self-labeling. So I gave you the example of see yourself as deviant and then you label yourself as deviant. You know, like going to AA and being like, hi, my name is so-and-so and I'm an alcoholic, right? For the real life consequences of trolling, it's like that video I showed you guys. Basically that there's real life consequences to trolling, which you can see in rape and death threats that are received by women who, have challenged video game culture. Desistance from chapter 6 is just the idea that, people tend to age out of crime. And positive deviance is something that is later interpreted as heroic. So we talked about the example of Rosa Parks as a positive deviance. I mean, clearly she was breaking the law, but you look back and see it as something positive. Moving on to chapter 7, social stratification, the division of society into groups that are arranged in a hierarchy, right? That stratified nature like we went through with the paper ball activity. And the idea that that division of society privileges some people over others. When it comes to social class, I just want you to know that it's a division, it's a form of social stratification, a division of society based on access to wealth, power, and prestige. Let's see, what's the next one? Weber's theory of wealth and prestige, just the idea that it's not just about owning the means of production, it's also about having wealth and prestige can give you more power. Cultural capital are just the habits, skills, or knowledge that help people gain advantages in society. Everyday class consciousness is that idea that you're aware of your own social class and you become aware of the social class of others. Criminal justice system, just the idea that the poor are more likely to encounter the criminal justice system because they lack the means to avoid the system. Structural mobility is when structural changes in society change the status of large groups of people. So we talked about the recession or the Great Depression or things like that and how that affects people's social class status. The just world hypothesis argues that every person has an equal chance of success. Okay, moving on to chapter 9. I want you to understand the difference between sex and gender. Sex is the biological category a person fits in based on their genitalia, while gender is the behavioral or personality traits that a group considers to be normal for male or female members. Constructionists are people that believe that gender roles are socially constructed. So it kind of already gives you the answer in it, constructionists. Gender identity is an individual's self-definition of their sense of gender. Feminization of poverty is the fact that women are more likely to live in poverty than men, which is often the result of the gender gap, the fact that there's more single mothers, increasing cost of childcare, all of that stuff. Feminism is the ideology and movement for social, political, and economic equality between men and women, right? The other F word. Sexuality is an umbrella term that explains our thoughts, desires, and sexual actions. When it comes to the mass media and sexual stereotypes, the mass media often perpetuates stereotypes about the LGBTQ community, which is, often not representative of the larger population, hence being a stereotype. And queer theory rejects this idea of an innate sexual identity and argues that sexual desire falls on a continuum and that people should have more plurality and difference in their accepted expressions of sexuality. Okay, so for chapter 8, again, a lot of this is just the definition from your book. Prejudice is when you apply ideas about characteristics that are applied to all members of that group. Discrimination is the unequal treatment of individuals based on their membership in a social group, often motivated by prejudice, and it can be either individual discrimination or institutional discrimination. Conflict theory studies race by, partially linking it to these economic issues as the poor struggle for resources, and it focuses on these struggles for power and control. Miscegenation is, basically romantic, sexual, or marital relationships between people of different races. Again, a lot of this is just the terms from your book. Affirmative action are programs that attempted to rectify problems of the past by increasing opportunities for racial minorities, also for women, right? Internal colonialism, basically that's the economic domination and subjugation of a minority group by the controlling group. So we had some examples of that we talked about. It's also typically political domination and subjugation of a minority group by the controlling group. And so we talked about South African apartheid and Jim Crow segregation as examples of internal colonialism. Assimilation is when an immigrant group adopts the language and culture of the dominant group, and that minority group gets absorbed into the mainstream or dominant group. And pluralism, all I really want you to know for that one is that it encourages racial and ethnic differences. It doesn't kind of force people to assimilate. It's basically trying to, celebrate difference. Chapter 10. So politics, again, from your book. These are typically policy-related attitudes that are tactics intended to influence government policy. Social institutions are those things that shape opportunities of individuals in society. We've been talking about like the entire semester. They're built on stratified systems of power. We've talked about like race, class, gender. Power elite, I just want you to know that, C. Wright Mills argued that there's this small group of people that have a lot of power in society that is composed mostly of the powerful military, political, and government elites who make all the important decisions in our culture. Okay, so as far as fourth estate, this is this idea that the media is supposed to serve as kind of like a fourth branch of government. Tracking is when you push students towards either college prep or trade schools, right? We talked about that. Fundamentalism is the idea of emphasizing literal interpretations of religious texts to return to a time of greater religious purity. And, secular, like what is a secular society? It's a society that has a separation of church and state, or a non-religious society. So then when it comes to your short answer essay questions, I basically put on here which one of those two, or which two of the three will be on the exam. So hint, it will be these ones. Okay, so for the first part, there were three main waves to the women's rights movement. Explain the goals of each wave and explain the ideology that links them all together. So for the first wave, I kind of want you to understand the chronological approach and just like the basic points. So especially for second wave, I'm not expecting you to put like every single thing that was accomplished or motivated towards in the second wave, but I do want you to keep in mind what were some of the main goals. So in the first wave, it's known specifically for suffrage, or, the right for women to vote. There was also like a lot of overlap with abolition movements, reform movements, which we talked about in class. But also, again, kind of like the late 1800s to 1920 was kind of like that first wave time period. Second wave was, the kind of 1960s, 1970s women's rights movement that, focused on all sorts of issues of inequality in education, in employment, in, sexual health, like access to birth control, sexual freedom, being able to have abortions, a lot of things during this wave. This is when issues of sexual harassment, domestic violence, and these kind of things were brought up to the forefront, as well as many other things that we discussed in class. So really, if you just kind of touch upon some of the main points of that movement, that's going to be good enough for that part. And then Let's see, for the third wave, that's going to be, the 1980s onward. So that wave is looking more at this kind of multicultural issue of not just looking at the lives and experiences of middle class to upper class white women, but also including women of all, social locations, and also including men into the analysis. Like the study of masculinities comes out of this wave, and really kind of looking at gender as a system that oppresses us all in a lot of ways. But again, kind of including perspectives of women that are poor, women of color, immigrant women, trans women, all of these kind of things, and also, of course, men and the struggles that they go through also as a result of this gendered system. So the ideology that links them all together, all I'm looking for there is that it's feminism, the belief in the political, social, and economic equality between men and women, right? So that one's pretty easy peasy. Second one, it's based on the film we watched in class, but it's going to be kind of more your interpretation, right? This one is not necessarily right or wrong. It's just kind of, you have to analyze what you saw in the film and apply it to this question. So, in response to the film misrepresentation, what is one step you can take to change the way media portrays women and girls? And how can we change portrayals as a community? So I want at least a concrete suggestion for both. I'm going to be looking to see that you answered both parts of that question. So if you have any other questions, let me know, but hopefully this is a decent review that'll help you prepare for the exam.